Yeah, I'd say there's still more water in there. Welcome back, and thanks for joining me for part 2 of pressure testing a fuel tank on a boat. So as you can see here, I'm going over the anatomy of a fuel system in a boat. The V here is a representation of the bottom of the boat hull. This box represents the fuel tank. The fuel tank vent is what allows the liquid to fill up and the air to push out, and the inverse when the fuel is being consumed. It also allows for a little bit of tank expansion so that the fluid inside the tank can expand and contract without bloating out the sides of your tank. This piece here is the sender, which is basically a float on a rheostat that electronically tells your gauge what your fuel level is. This section here is your fuel pickup. It is what draws the fuel up using a fuel pump, draws the fuel up into the motor through this filter, and then provides fuel for your engine. The fuel fill is obviously where you pump your gas in. Note that this neck comes down a couple inches down into the tank, representing your 90% fill capacity. When you're filling the tank, your fill will only go up to this level here. Okay, so we've got the anatomy covered. Now let's go over the actual testing. So as indicated in my first video, we use the pinch pliers. We use this Schrader valve cap with the pressure gauge on it so that we can burst pressure into the tank and add the pressure we need to figure out where our leak is. And we have a bladder to shut off the actual fill port. As we add a couple pounds of pressure on here, again, check your tank. Before you add any pressure, you want to know what your max pressure is. Depending on how full your tank is, the more full your tank is, the less air it's going to take to make that 3 pounds of pressure, which is what mine was rated at. On a tank that's pretty much wide open because it has no fuel in it, then you have all this space in here that you'll need to fill up with air. All right, so let's go hop in the boat. Okay, so I'm back in the boat and I found my culprit. So when I put pressure on the tank, I put about 1.5 pounds of pressure on the tank, and I ran around with this sprayer full of Dawn soap and water, sprayed the top of my tank, and it was blowing bubbles like crazy. So I figured that's where my leak is, obviously. And so when I tugged on it, it made a pop and all the pressure came out. And I found out that the last owner didn't use screws when they worked on the sending unit last time. I'm not sure if they replaced the sender, but when I put the sender inside, the screws don't line up to the holes correctly. I'm gonna have to figure out what I got. But so by doing that, I ended up taking advantage of that and using my my pump setup that I had before, which has a smaller water separator on it. As you can see, I got another quart of water out of the bottom of my tank. And so what I did was I took the gas line, I wrapped an aluminum piece of wire around it. It's thick wire, kind of like common ground wire. Copper would work too. And I used some zip ties to hold the tube to it so that I can direct up into the corner and this side and this side. I had the front of the boat tilted all the way down so that all the water and contaminants and everything would rush to the front. And I used this up in the corners and sucked out all the water. And also in the filter, I found some trash. I don't see it now, but there's some trash floating around. So that's a win. And I'll just take that and move forward. So what I did to pressurize the tank again was back over here, I used this bladder and put it down inside the fuel and put some pressure on it so that it would swell up and seal. And then back here on the back of the boat, as you can see on the the fuel line coming from the tank, I made this pressure gauge that I showed you earlier, and that's how I managed to get pressure on the tank so that I could get pressure inside the tank. And then I used a pair of pinch pliers. Up inside here is where my vent line is on that left-hand side. The pinch pliers are still on the hose and it's pinched, and I'm going to leave it that way until I get this sender issue resolved and then can put pressure on it and test again. And when I do that secondary test, I'll give you a better idea of how all this works. I'll run a video for that as well. Okay, so let's do a quick wrap up here. The big key point to remember is that we have to pressurize the tank and use something to figure out where these leaks are coming from. Soap and water works very well. check all your connections, check all your liquid necks, check all the seams on your tanks, even check where the tank mounts to the boat if you can get access to that area, because that is a stress point and it can crack. You want to make sure that you can stop the ability for that water to get into your tank. Make sure you tilt the nose of your boat down and use a rigid hose of some sort or a supported hose to be able to get all the water out of the front of your tank, and then you can start with a clean slate. Make sure you seal your seal points. In this case, it was my sending unit. It needed to be sealed. So make sure that you're using product like either the gas-proof Permatex like I used or something else that is resilient to gas. If you have any questions, post it down at the bottom and I'll be happy to answer whatever I can. I'll also provide some links to some of the things that I've included in here, including my pump out system that I made by myself. It was very instrumental in removing almost 2 gallons of water that I had in my tank that just kept continuously causing a plague for me. I had taken my boat out about 4 or 5 times thinking I had it fixed when I really didn't until I did this method. I hope this works for you and I appreciate your input. Have a good one.